Warhammer 3 as lizards, demons, rats, and much more, but something has been missing since the start. Where are all the crabs? Well, if CA are too busy delaying DLCs and farming more negative reviews than a game with a female protagonist you can't goon to, modders will have to take on the responsibility. Introducing the Crustacean Nation, a race comprised entirely of crabs and various other undersea species. They have their own racial and faction mechanics, a massive roster of totally new units, and 5 campaigns to choose from. Let's take a look and see how they play in the campaign. But if you want to see how to avoid ads on these videos, it's by becoming a channel member. Just $1 a month for access to all the same videos, but none of the ads. Check it out below, and now let's talk about some crabs. So first up, their racial mechanics, we have the Ancestral Offerings. This is kind of like the changing of the ways from Siege in the sense that you have a selection of abilities that affect yours and other factions. There's a range of options and they vary from faction to faction, but they can offer some real power, like resetting army range, increasing local recruitment capacity, and even granting your lords a powerful choice of permanent traits. To use any of these options, you must spend Gleaming Shells. This is a resource exclusive to the crabs and it's gained through a variety of means, such as battling, buildings, and events. It can then be spent on these actions as well as certain buildings. With how many of these shells you can have coming in per turn with just a few provinces, you want to be using these offerings on a very regular basis to keep pace with other factions. Upping your recruitment speed or weakening enemy armies will be crucial for keeping yourself in the game, especially early on, so don't be afraid to make use of them early. You will only earn more shells as the game goes on, so don't be afraid to keep spending them. Honestly, outside of this, excluding faction-specific mechanics, they have a pretty standard campaign playstyle. They recruit, take and develop settlements and perform research just like any other faction. Their tech tree is full of everything you'd expect for campaign and battle buffs, all of it, of course, in a crab shape. As I said, they are balanced around using those ancestral offerings, so without them, they have quite slow recruitments early on and tend to do pretty terribly in auto-resolve. I will say in battle they are damn good, so manual battling is the way to go, but auto-resolve doesn't know what to do with them and makes for a brutal campaign if you rely on it too much. Their economy is also not the greatest. It can definitely get on a roll later on in the game, but for most of the early and mid game, they can struggle to make a ton of cash outside of battling unless you really spec your settlements into it. They also seem to have pretty rocky relations with most factions, so trade is also a challenge, limiting their income even further. This obviously makes them quite challenging, as one wrong outcome can result in no way to make a new army in a doomed campaign. It is worth noting that the mod offers you a choice of difficulty settings every time you start a new campaign. These are independent of the game's difficulty settings, so it gives you an extra layer of difficulty customization, whether you want an easy map painter or a masochistic pain simulator. And of course, this isn't even mentioning that every lord has their own mechanics that set them apart from the others. The Crustacean Court are led by King Crab. As I mentioned earlier, every faction has 4 difficulties to choose from when starting. As far as I can tell, they roughly start in the same position every time, but sometimes with no settlements or more enemies nearby, so bear that in mind. He starts in Wrecker's Point on the northern coast of the Empire. The starting war with Marienburg takes them south, and they can either continue to battle against the Empire or join them against the vast number of threats nearby. This is the most diplomatic of all the crab factions. Their outposts gain them extra shells, and whenever they vassalize or destroy a faction, they receive improved relations, growth, control, and construction cost, making them work really well as a vassal collector. Alongside these 2 mini mechanics, they also gain improved relations with all of crab factions and gain more income from vassals, making them very worth collecting. Lastly, the Crustacean Noble Lords gain extra recruit rank right out the gate. King Crab's army can recruit the faction's royal units quicker and grants them Guardian to synergize well with their army leader. All units also gain leadership when fighting under one so inspiring. The Sentinels of the Great Reef are led by the Reef Speaker. They start in the Star Tower off the east coast of Lustria. The starting war with the rats quickly takes them to the mainland, where there's no shortage of powerful enemies. Their mechanic is Reef Health. This is a number at the top of the screen that can be increased by building the Great Reef building chain in coastal settlements. The higher this number, the more bonuses you gain for your faction in the form of increased growth, income, control, and more. This also unlocks an increased bonuses for the Blessing of the Great Reef. This is a temporary buff armies gain from moving through regions with a Great Reef building in them. It's a fairly simple mechanic, but one that takes a tremendous number of coastal settlements to get major value out of. But it gives you plenty of incentive to continually expand, so makes for decent motivation. Aside from this, their armies can also make use of the Reef Stride stance, which is essentially a teleport, alongside being able to build coral buildings for cheaper. The Reef Speaker's army has increased replenishment and cleanses corruption wherever they go. The Ancient Wanderers are led by Old Keltbeard. They start in the Temple of Skulls on the east coast of Nehekara. The starting war takes them south against the rats and eventually lizards, but you have options to the north and west depending on who you want to battle. There's not a lot of choices for diplomacy, so be prepared for a lot more battling unless you are willing to travel further afield. Whenever they capture a settlement, they can choose to make it into a sanctuary settlement. These are far more limited in what can be built inside, but the main building can be upgraded to buff the faction in a number of ways. You can gain faction-wide unit buffs, as well as massive income at the cost of gleaming shells per turn. That said, there is an option to generate shells, so if you're running low, you can always build one of those. Alongside this, they can also complete quests to recruit legendary lords and heroes to their faction. Lastly, they have an increased research rate and paid less upkeep for ancient Leviathan units. Keltbeard's army can move further on the map, and ancient Leviathans gain bonus to defense. Additionally, all spellcasters in his army have reduced cooldowns for their spells. The Tide Lords Fellowship are led by Tide Lord Arthronritus. They start in the hidden landing on the eastern coast of the Cathayan jungle. The starting war takes them inland towards the Greenskins and opens you up to head north towards demons, lizards, and more. Allies will be in short supply until you reach actual Cathay, so be ready for a lonely early game. The factions access the Tide Lord's Armory, which is essentially one of those crafting mechanics that a bunch of factions have at this point. From here, they can craft various weapons, armors, and enchanted items. As well as this, they can purchase unique Tideland units, which are essentially more powerful versions of existing units. The faction also gains more shells when completing a number of specific actions, to give them a few more to toss into the armory. They also gain a unique commandment to grant bonuses for the faction leader, and this stacks, so put this in a bunch of settlements, and quickly your lord can spiral out of control, which is pretty fun. Lastly, the faction gains more income from post-battle loot to account for the lack of friends and trade, and all armies gain attack when battling at sea. The Tide Lord's army has an increased reinforcement range alongside reduced upkeep for Tide Guard units and Strider for his entire army. This makes him great at running high mobility armies to surround enemies, no matter where they try to run to. And lastly, the Beast Slayers are led by Claudius Beastslayer. They start in the frozen landing near the east end of Kislev, before the corner to the Chaos Wastes. They have no shortage of enemies with all the Chaos and other aggressive factions nearby. The only possible allies are Malachi and possibly Kislev, but for the most part, you'll be all alone against various forms of chaos. They can build the Ranger Assembly building in their settlements, which grants stacking buffs for Rangers Assembly expeditions and income from shells post-battle. However, each one also increases the cost of expeditions, and if you are wondering what they are, I'll tell you. They're essentially rights, with each one providing the faction with buffs for 10 turns. You have options for more income, unit buffs, and more, so they're worth activating whenever you can to empower your faction as needed. Their unique commandment negates climate penalties at the cost of shells, allowing you to improve relations for far cheaper for just a few shells. This makes it useful when expanding into inhospitable territory, such as the nearby Chaos Wastes. Lastly, they also have a handful of unique technologies to improve everything unique to them. The faction also captures more enemies post-battle for greater rewards, Rangers are all immune to psychology, and the Beast Pen buildings are cheaper to build, giving you access to more monstrous units in the roster. Claudius's army has improved defense against ambushers, and pays less upkeep for Rangers and certain monster units. This makes his army great at imitating Norska, with beasts and beast hunters aplenty. This mod has a surprising amount of depth, given how wacky it may seem from the surface. It looks like it's going to be a joke faction that's Frankenstein together from existing content, but in reality, it's actually quite a lot of high-quality bespoke content. The base racial mechanics are very simple, but slot very well into the turn-to-turn gameplay. Certain vanilla mechanics, like the changing of the ways from which the ancestral offerings are inspired, can fade into the background until you need something more specific. The effects here, however, are much more generally useful, and I found myself relying on them as a pillar of gameplay rather than an added extra. Each of the Lord's mechanics also add a further layer to this in their own unique ways. Nothing here is overly complicated or difficult to make use of, but they each tailor how you play the game, making each of the campaigns feel different from each other, which is something that even the base game can struggle with. I'm not saying that each one feels like a totally different game or anything, but they all have a focus that ever so slightly tweaks your goals and approach to each turn. The downsides of this mod aren't really the fault of the mod itself. Auto-resolve seems to be brutal for them for the most part. Battles would inflict outrageous casualties when I could easily win them manually. I am hardly a master of manual battling, so this isn't something that just I will end up frustrated with. Their relations with other factions are also pretty brutal if you don't get them positive early. They seem to start rough and spiral to being terrible unless you do something to stop it, which can be pretty frustrating. I would have also liked to see more army direction for each faction. Outside of some very slight focuses on very specific units, there's no overarching unit type focus for each faction. Think how Skulltaker is exceptionally good at using bloodletters. It may just be me, but I like when a faction forces me to build my armies differently, and I never really felt that pressure here. I do have a few gripes with the roster, but I'll save those for the battle video, because spoiler, it is massive and cramming it all into one video would be a little bit long. But what I want to know is which lord looks the most fun to you? Do you want to heal the reef and reap the benefits, or raise sanctuaries to the shell as Keltbeard? Let me know in the comments below, like, subscribe, and if you want more mod videos then check out this one all about the Skaven in SFO.